So, welcome everybody back to yet another episode of the SAFT podcast. All right, and we were talking about what the last episode, Jacob.
Yeah. So in the last episode, we were talking about the objections to premise one. We were looking more about the premise one, right? And what is the premise one?
Premise one is everything that begins to exist has a cause.
Yes, there
Now
you
I'm
go.
just getting used to it. Now
Yeah,
it's just I
it's
can just sling it whenever
it's
I
part
want.
it's part of the habit, right?
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
right now, I could wake you up in the middle of the night. I can ask Steven what is premise one.
Yeah, definitely. I'll be able to answer right then and there. I won't even ask why he woke me up. I'll just answer it and go back to sleep.
It's like when our teachers tell us, right, when we learn the quadratic equation a plus b the whole square, they tell us you should learn this so much that if I wake you up in the middle of the night, you should be able to answer.
Exactly. So now it is.
Yeah, but thankfully, I think this is more useful than the quadratic equation.
Yeah. Oh, all of the mathematicians over there are fuming right now.
Yeah. So in the last episode, we were looking at whether philosophers could oppose to whether they could reject this very basic understanding of what we know about reality,
Right.
That things that come into existence should have a cause, and we were looking at renowned philosopher J.L. Mackie's objection, and his idea was that he could conceive or imagine in his mind something coming into existence out of nothing. Right? Something just popping into existence, like we would see in a cartoon or a magic show.
Yeah, exactly.
And he said that I can imagine something of that sort happening right now in front of me, so therefore that should be possible to happen.
Right.
And we discussed about how that is quite absurd.
Yeah.
And in fact, he quotes David Hume to sort of build up his case, and then we looked at a quote from Hume himself, right? A miracle-denying, empiricist, atheist thinker, David Hume himself saying, "No, I would not claim something as absurd as that things can come into existence out of nothing." His point was that I think that we know things can come with a cause because of these other reasons. And I think when we were talking about that, you were mentioning about Russell's teapot.
Yeah.
The flying
So Bertrand
spaghetti monster.
Russell's teapot analogy. I think for those of you who are listening in or viewing the video at home, you might have gotten kind of confused with the way that I was posing it, because it ended up becoming kind of like a loose thread that we just ended up just not talking about it. So behind the camera, we kind of like discussed, and with my right frame of mind, I kind of like rephrased the argument, and I think it's starting to make more sense.
Yeah, it
this
actually
time.
did. Yeah. So you want to list that out for the audience?
Yeah, sure. So essentially what we wanted to understand is, what is the teapot analogy? Essentially, what is it trying to argue, right? So essentially, what is it exactly?
Yeah. So the Russell's teapot, what that is meant to say is that Bertrand Russell put that out saying that there is this very minuscule teapot out there orbiting between some planet, I think Jupiter and Mars, I guess, and you can't see it with your telescope. It's really, really minuscule. Minuscule. It's really, really minuscule, but it is out there, right? You just can't see it, but it's out there. And a similar one was the flying spaghetti monster, or the flying monster in the garage, all that stuff. And in that also there is a dragon in your garage. You can't see it, you can't touch it. It flies above the ground, so you can't detect its footprint. It has cold blooded, so thermal imaging doesn't work. It beats fire, but it's cold fire, so you can't use thermal imaging there again.
Right.
But it exists. And all of these analogies, like these aren't arguments per se. They are basically analogies that they quite brilliantly use these analogies to point out what they think is a flaw with theism.
Yeah.
And this is what Anthony Flew, a notorious atheist turned theist, turned deist, as in, like, he doesn't believe there's a personal God. He believes that there is a power source, an entity, right? Not a personal he being.
Essentially a watchmaker, something that just has created the universe.
Yeah, sort of like a force behind the universe.
Yeah, force behind the universe.
Whether it's personal or not, sort of neutral on that. So Anthony Flew in his work, I think it was in the Presumption of Atheism. I may be wrong, but he mentioned about death by 1,000 qualification. It's so much so that you are adding so much of qualifiers to something that it's sort of died off, right? Like your qualifiers didn't do the job. And this is sort of similar thing they're trying to do with this analogy. Like you have this dragon in your garage, but it's invisible. You can touch it. It flies off the ground. You're adding so much of qualifications to it, where they ask, okay, what is the difference between a dragon that you can touch, see, sense, and not dragon in the garage.
Yeah.
So same thing they ask with the Russell's teapot also. What is the difference between this minuscule teapot flying in the space that you cannot detect or see, and there being no teapot out there? So that is just what the
That
Russell's
is what
teapot.
it is. But
yeah.
essentially, what was that? The teapot analogy. Why did they use it against theism? So what was that?
So the reason was to say that you are talking about a God, whom you don't have any.
You cannot sensorily.
You don't have any empirical evidence for God, right? And they were like, "Oh, you're talking about a God whom you experience." But hey, what is that supposed to mean?
Yeah, how is that so much different from this teapot that I cannot see or do anything about?
Right.
I said that it exists, and that essentially that argument is used to say that it. You can just say the same thing about a God that you cannot.
Yeah,
but then when you put it down with J.L. Mackie, what is he saying? He's saying that anything that you can conceive just can
be part of reality.
Can be part of reality, which directly goes against this argument that they are trying to say, because that they are using that argument to completely say that this particular thing is definitely not possible.
Yeah, as in so the connection that you made, and that's a very good connection. That's a very good observation. So the connection is that in the Russell's teapot and the dragon in the garage analogies and examples, they're trying to say, just because you can conceive something doesn't mean that it's real. It's part of reality. And J.L. Mackie comes along and says, hey, you can conceive something and it could be part of reality. It could be possible. That's actually, like I said, that's a very brilliant observation to make about how they go, how they go against each other. But then, I don't know, it's the fact that J.L. Mackie is who came out and said that things can come into existence without a cause, right? Like you said, even David Hume thinks it's quite absurd.
Yeah, but even then, right, without a cause, but you thinking about it can also be a cause, right, for it, in terms of, even though it's just popping into existence, you have conceived it in your mind, which is the cause behind it coming into existence. Or is that what he's talking about? Anything that is possible to conceive, that can happen. Is that what?
So J.L. Mackie's point isn't that everything that begins to exist has no cause. That is not his point. His point is that you can't say that everything that begins to exist has a cause. Meaning, there could be things that begins to exist that has a cause, and there could be things that begin to exist that do not have a cause. So if it has a cause, great. If it doesn't have a cause, great. That's sort of a position. What we say is that everything that begins to exist, even the thought it begins to exist, it has a cause. Mackie's point is that no, you can't go around saying that. There could be things that begin to exist without a cause, just like there are things that begin to exist with a cause. So that is where Mackie gets into the nuances.
Right.
But anyway, we've got much more things to look into.
Yeah, true. That's true. So let's power on with that, right? So did philosophers oppose to this premise once? So right now we did say that J.L. Mackie, he quoted Hume to kind of say that, you can just conceive this and then it would exist. So, and we also discussed about all of that. So now we keep on talking about Hume, David Hume. Now, who is this David Hume?
Yeah. So in the last episode, I mentioned this in fleeting when I mentioned about David Hume's objection. So, and I will just clear this up because David Hume is a figure that is quite important in the field of philosophy and economics as well. So he has contributed towards economics, and this was a time when economics was seen as a moral philosophy. When Adam Smith, the father of economics, wrote The Wealth of a Nation as such. So David Hume's key contribution is, and he's most recognized for his outright objection against the possibility and even probability of miracles. So David Hume's key point was, and maybe sometime down later when we're looking at miracles and possibility, we look at David Hume and Spinoza and Newtonian mechanism and all of that, how they factor into miracles. And to just breeze on, David Hume's point is that you have so much of a priori, right? Prior to something, you have so much of evidence around you that miracles cannot happen. That even if you see a miracle, sort of, your a priori knowledge that you have prior to it would cancel out that happening. So, in other words, to put it very simply, his point is that the improbability of a miracle happening is so high that no amount of evidence can overturn it.
Okay.
So
you'll have to break that down a little
bit. But the thing is, if we get into that, we'll be going off topic. Okay. So that is David Hume's. Again, we will break it down much more clearly when we get to the miracles part of it. But that was, in essence, David Hume's point in the fact that the probability of a miracle not happening is so high that no amount of evidence can overturn it. Now, it gets very philosophical in that sense. Right now, we'll be wondering, okay, how does that? So David Hume has a whole list of case for it. But we will look at that later. And as we stick with J.L. Mackie, I want to touch upon this interesting point of whether J.L. Mackie actually thought that premise one, everything that begins to exist has a cause.
Whether he own point.
So in his work Theism, in page 89, I just read out this quote to you. This is from J.L. Mackie. He says, "Still this causal principle, right? Causal principle as in cause and effect principle, what we're talking about in premise one." He says, "Still this causal principle has some plausibility in that it is constantly confirmed in our experience and also used reasonably in interpreting our experience." So that is basically him showing his hands and saying, yeah, you know what, actually, I think this actually works. So we're saying that the real world interaction, right, our real world experience of what is happening in reality, of how things turn out in the outside world, they point us strongly towards the fact that everything that begins to exist has a cause. And interestingly, he said that this causal principle has some plausibility. So in the previous episode, in 2 episodes back, we were talking about the difference between plausibility, possibility, and probability. We'll link it for you to take a look. In the sense that it is believable, it sounds reasonable. Like when you tell me that everything that begins to exist has a cause, is that it comes off as reasonable. It comes off as there is merit to this thought, that there is logical grounding, a logically coherent framework within which this principle is operating. And that is what J.L. Mackie is essentially eventually saying. He's saying that, well, I think this is believable because it is confirmed in our experience, in our daily point. And when we interpret our experience, and that means if you step into a murder scene, right, there you're going to interpret the murder scene as a cause and effect mechanism. There is the effect, the cause, suicide, murder, theft, robbery gone wrong, whatever. There also you're interpreting your experience using the causal principle.
Right.
And like now when you said about an idea coming in your mind, even that experience, when you're breaking it down, there again you are deploying the causal principle. And it is just an outright...
and causal principle meaning?
The principle of that there is cause and effect relationship. Like cause brings about effect,
right,
all of that. And it's just J.L. Mackie clearly coming out and saying, yeah, I think that really is the case.
Yeah. Every effect must have a cause.
Every effect must have a cause, yeah.
Okay, so before we look at Mackie's objections, I will put in the, or are you going to say?
Yeah, so Mackie's objection is something that we'll have to look later. But right now we'll see, and I want to cover this within this episode. It's been dragging a bit. We will look at what are the three arguments for premise one, right? And when I quoted Mackie's, and something that I just observed right now, that in that J.L. Mackie's outright exclamation of that the causal present effect is active, actually point towards these 3 arguments that I'm going to list out right now. So the first argument is that we know by metaphysical intuition that something cannot come from nothing. Now, what do I mean by metaphysical intuition?
A lot of people might be asking that.
Yeah. So we say things that we know intuitively, as in, now we are not talking about something as in a mother knowing that the child is about to cry, or a mother knowing that the child is upset. Okay, we would say, okay, you know that intuitively. It's an instinct sort of thing. What we mean by metaphysical intuition is, and this intuition we carry with us every day, right? And I will sort of hint at what we mean by that.
Right. And also, the difference between physical and metaphysical.
Yeah, that is actually quite complex one to break down.
Right, because people might be wondering.
Yeah, so right now, when I break down what I mean by metaphysical intuition, you will get that.
Right.
Some philosophers, it is somewhat broad and very loosely defined as that is metaphysics, like beyond
I would
physics.
think about it in the sense that, the reason for the physics or the kind of the underlying principles behind what.
Yeah, so when I give this example, you will get to understand what metaphysics is without me defining metaphysics. So a metaphysical intuition is that something like the law of non-contradiction.
Okay.
Right? Yeah. We haven't tested out the law of non-contradiction on a regular basis in our life. But when I tell you things that at the surface level look contradictory to you, you instinctively realize that it is contradictory. And you instinctively realize that it cannot be part of reality.
Yes. Now, it cannot be true.
It cannot be true. Now, did you realize that by actually experimenting it out? No, you didn't.
No.
Like when I say a square circle,
Hmm.
it is not, I have never tried to draw a square circle on a piece of paper. I have never done that. But I know that it is impossible. That is a way of metaphysical intuition.
Right.
The law of us identifying the law of non-contradiction and realizing what is contradictory and how contradictions cannot be part of reality. When we haven't tested and experiment every form of contradiction out there is an example of metaphysical intuition. Right? So there you get the C of metaphysical.
Yeah.
Like, the law, like you said, the law of these things undergird and run through the physical reality. And when we say that something can come from nothing, uncaused, all of that, it instinctively rings in our head that I don't think that can work, right? Just in the same way, when I say a contradictory statement, you would think in your mind, no, I don't think that's possible. Again, you haven't physically, experientially tested it out with an experiment. You haven't conducted a lab experiment. But just as you heard two contradictory statements and you realize that can't be part of reality, when you have not tested it out. Right. Similarly, each and every one of us, when we hear that something can come from nothing, by this metaphysical intuition,
We know that it's wrong.
we know that it's wrong. So that is the first argument that we all hold on to.
Yeah.
And
even like when you look at a murder scene, you know that
there is a
just going back to your previous point, that
Yeah,
there has to be a killer or
Yeah.
something that led to this person. That person couldn't have been dead just because.
Yeah.
Couldn't have a stab wound just
Yeah,
because.
and we would see that when we are looking into, let's say, the recent photography that we got from the James Webb Telescope, magnificent photography of God's handiwork in creation.
That's amazing.
When we look at and we see at the galaxies, right? We're talking about galaxies that maybe we haven't identified so far yet.
Yeah.
But we try to explore those galaxies under the assumption that the laws of non-contradiction overrule our mathematical understanding, right? That the cause and effect principles are operating behind even in those galaxies, right? It is something that we know that undergirds all of reality. It is sort of like our one of our most basic belief, right? A very fundamental assumption that we hold to interpret, as Mackie said, to interpret our experience. So this metaphysical intuition that we all hold is the argument number one. Now, argument number two is that if we say that something can come from nothing, then why doesn't everything come from nothing? Or why doesn't anything come from nothing? Right? And this is actually connected to what you said early on when you said maybe nothing has the property of nothing.
Yeah.
Right? So when we were talking about, now we addressed, that is quite an absurd thing to say, nothing having a property, nothing. So we touched on very briefly there what we mean by nothing. Now, I don't want to go into it all over again and lose time on that. So we'll link the episode again. Nothing means no thing, the absence of anything.
Yeah.
So if there is no thing there, then there is no thing there to have any properties in the first place.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because what is there to have any property? A good example would be dividing 5 by 0.
Yeah.
Like the answer is
not
undefined. It's undefined, right? Because if you're taking 5 apples and you're dividing between 0 people, and the question is, how many apples will each person get? What do you mean by each person? There is no person there for anyone to get any apple. It is the same thing with nothing as well. Like there is no thing there for a property to be held by something. Property is held by things.
Yeah, it's essentially, if we're making it much easier for us to understand, it's essentially like saying light and darkness, right? Darkness, in a sense, because the thing is, darkness can just be held as the absence of complete light, right? Just to make it simpler.
Yeah, so, but we could talk about, we could detect darkness and I get your point as an absence of anything.
Okay, if you're using a photovoltaic sensor, right? It detects darkness how? By seeing how much light there is, right? If the amount of light is 0, then there is darkness.
Yeah, the thing is, okay, now I think we may actually be complicating.
Yeah, but... Okay, fine.
So,
I'm sorry.
So, yeah, so I think because then we'll have to see whether our analogy actually holds up really well before we bring up that analogy.
True.
But so nothing means the absence of anything. So there isn't anything there. Like I said, ask your question. Like if I divide 5 apple between 0 people, how many apple will each person get?
Yeah, there is no people to
There
divide.
is no reason for anyone to receive.
By,
right.
Yeah.
So you need to have something. You need at least have the denominator 1.
Yeah. So one person will receive all 5
all 5 apples. Right. So in the same way, when we ask, can something come from nothing? There is nothing there for it to come out of. Or there is nothing there for it to cause anything.
Yeah.
And what that means is that there is nothing there for it to hold any properties. So you can't say that nothing has a property of creating only universes. Or like when you said, nothing has a property of nothing. even that, what has the property of nothing? So you would say nothing. What is nothing? When there is no thing. So what has property in the first place?
Yeah.
You
It
see
just
that
starts
it just
going
getting
around
absurd and absurd and absurd. So what happens is that sometimes philosophers post up and say, maybe universe is the only thing that could come out of existence from nothing, right? So you're telling me that nothing has a property to create only universe. Nothing has a property to create only universe, meaning there is no thing there that has a property to create the universe. Yeah. Again, the same question. Like, what is there to have that property to create only universe? And like, this is a mistake that even Alex O'Connor, a brilliant YouTube atheist, the biggest atheist channel itself, Cosmic Skeptic, Alex O'Connor made when he was engaging with the Dr. Craig on the Kalam cosmological argument, which actually throws perspective into how people mix this up. And so, because there is no thing to hold any specific property to create certain things, which means that in all of reality, we should expect things to pop out of nowhere. Because creation isn't restrained by anything. There is no thing that is having any property there to restrain creation to happen in one specific manner.
Yeah.
So that would be second objection. If something can come from nothing, then why doesn't anything come from nothing? Right? Why is it that only the universe can pop into existence, but not Beethoven right now playing a piano in our living room?
Right, exactly.
And so that would be the second objection. Now the second.
And also it reminds me of this joke. Nothing can separate us from God's love. Oh, so nothing can separate us from God's love.
Now, nothing stopped Hitler's advance to Poland. Oh, thank God. Nothing stopped Hitler's advance to Poland.
Nothing stopped it, no good.
So this would be the second argument for premise one. And the third argument is what Mackie said, that this is plausibly confirmed in our experience and in our interpretation of experience. That we see this cause and effect happening every time we look around and we make sense of reality. This is our fundamental assumption to make sense of the world. This is what we use when we're talking about microbiology, or when we're looking at the macro sense of the universe, of the cosmos. Right? It is this basic assumption that you always fall back on. So those are the three arguments for premise one, and I'll just restate it again. Premise one, everything that begins to exist has a cause, and the argument one is that we know that something cannot come from nothing with the metaphysical intuition. An intuition like we know things are contradictory cannot be part of reality in the same way without any physical experimentation. The second argument is that if something can come from nothing, then why doesn't anything and everything come from nothing? Right? Because there is no thing that has a property to withhold creation. There is no thing there. 5 divided by 0, same situation. And the third point is that we see premise one constantly confirmed in our daily experience. And like Mackie said, it is something that we use to not just comprehend experience, but also to interpret, to make sense of our experience. And so in the upcoming episode, we'll look into Mackie's objection, and it gets quite philosophical, but we will try and break it down as we've been doing so far the next episode. So and we will see you in the next one. So thank you for joining us.
And remember to, if you want to learn more about us, you can visit our website at saptapologetics.com. And also, if you want to follow us or keep up to date about our stuff, you can follow us on Instagram, on Facebook, and even Twitter, all with the handle saptapologetics. Except for like Twitter, you'll have to do capital S and capital
I think they'll get with small caps as well.
I think, if you search it, you'll definitely get it for all of it. So, see
you in the next one. Take care.
Take care.